Richard.
And I'm Gary, and these are our incredible stories. Hello and welcome back to all of our listeners from around the world and across the United States. You might have noticed that our music has a very eerie tone to it this evening, and that's because we're going to be sharing a very incredible story that has to do with aliens.
And UFOs.
And UFOs, yep. So this story is near and dear to my heart because I remember as a young child, we had just moved back from Florida to New Mexico, and we were staying with my grandparents, and you and Mom were looking for a new place to live. And the two choices that I can remember were Roswell, New Mexico, and I believe, where was it? Where's the one place that they tested the atomic bomb?
Los Alamos.
Los Alamos. So it came down to those two choices, Los Alamos or Roswell, New Mexico. Now, I didn't know anything about either one. I knew that New Mexico was the birthplace of the atomic bomb. It's where it was tested heavily, especially out at White Sands National Missile Range in Alamogordo. But I didn't know much about the other two. And I remember that you had started reading a book about Roswell and the Roswell mystery. And I started asking questions. What are these books about? What is this about? And you said, well, you know, back in 1947, a UFO crashed in Roswell. And supposedly, they recovered 3 alien bodies. And then...
Oh, your ears picked up at that.
Oh, you're not kidding. So at that point, when we were asked where would we like to live, Los Alamos or Roswell, I remember saying with much excitement, Roswell, 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 Roswell.
Yeah.
There was no question, and it was unanimous between me and Amber that was by far the most interesting place that we could possibly live. I even remember when we went looking for houses, asking the real estate guy if he knew anything about aliens, to which he just chuckled and then figured, well, great, now we have more of these people moving into our town.
Coming into our town.
So, but the story goes back, and so this evening we are going to be talking about that. Now, you have the full story right there in front of you, so let's delve into some of the deeper parts of the story and answer some questions people may have about the story and they've never heard of.
Yeah, I think if we start off with a backgrounder, then we can expand beyond that and talk about some of your experiences at some of these actual locations in and around Roswell.
Yes.
So, as you mentioned, it began in the summer of 1947. Keep in the back of your mind that was 2 years after World War II came to an end. Now, if people are familiar with World War II, they know that during World War II, the Soviet Union was an ally of the United States.
That it was.
Along with Britain and France, and so, and other countries, Canada, other countries, the allies. But by 1947, friction had developed between America and the Soviet Union, and we were at the dawn of what would be called the Cold War, which would last for a number of years. And it was at this time that the U.S. Army Air Forces there in Roswell at the U.S. Army Air Force Base sent out one shocker of a press release announcing they'd recovered a flying disc from a ranch near Roswell. And so today, by the way, the town has a UFO museum, a research center, even a flying saucer-inspired McDonald's, Gary, even alien-themed streetlights, and an extraterrestrial family stranded in a broken-down UFO on the side of State Route 285 looking for a jump start.
They've embraced, they have truly embraced it. Not only that, but they've had countless TV shows and movies made about the town of the city of Roswell.
Yeah. And so even that series Roswell High School, if you remember.
Yes. TV. Oh, I'll be talking about that, trust me.
Okay. So let's go ahead then and find out some of the historical background before we go off on flights of fancy here. So sometime between mid-June, early July of 47, there was a rancher named W.W. Mac Brazel. And that name is familiar to me because it was a guy named Brazel who shot and killed Sheriff Pat Garrett. And we've had Sheriff Pat Garrett's story on the podcast earlier. And so how many Brazels would be in New Mexico that weren't related? That's an unusual name.
I mean, it's a side note, but I think that they were, well, I can't say that, but I would say they're probably family.
Related, yeah.
Because Roswell's only a hop, skip, and a jump away from Lincoln County. And,
yeah. And, right. So, anyways, he was a rancher. He found the wreckage on his property there in, as you mentioned, Lincoln County, New Mexico. That's about 75 miles north of Roswell. By the way, I don't know if Mac read the newspaper or not, but just for your information, there had been some flying disc and flying saucer stories in the national press that summer.
Yeah, actually.
So this didn't just come out of the, fertile imagination.
No.
Maybe his imagination started running wild after he had read these stories in the newspaper. What do you think?
Well, here's the thing. We'll get into a little bit more of the thoughts and theories behind it. I'm not so sure that it was his imagination running wild with him, and we'll go into reasons why afterward. But there was a lot of things happening across the United States and during the 40s, including things that were happening in California, which was another separate incident involving the U.S. military.
Okay, so by the way, Brazel found some rubber strips, some tinfoil, and some thick paper, things like that. He brought the material to the sheriff in Roswell. George Wilcox was his name. And he brought it to the attention of Colonel William Blanchard. He was the commanding officer of the Roswell Army Airfield at the time. And so the next day, the Army released a statement saying, quote, the many rumors regarding the flying disc became a reality yesterday when the intelligence office of the 509th Bomb Group of the 8th Air Force, Roswell Army Airfield, was fortunate enough to gain possession of a disc through the cooperation of one of the local ranchers and the sheriff's office of Chavez County. Now, according to that statement, Major Jesse Marcel, who you know of, he was an intelligence officer, and he oversaw the investigation of the crash site and the recovered materials. So the next day, the Roswell Daily Record, newspaper we read when we lived there, they wrote a little bit, ran a story about the crash and the astonishing Army claim. But U.S. Army officials then quickly reversed themselves on the flying saucer claim, stating that the found debris was actually a weather balloon. And they released photographs of Major Marcel posing with pieces of the supposed weather balloon debris as proof, and you've seen that photo. Now,
yes.
Fast forward now to 1994, Gary. Many folks were skeptical of the government's changed account. And so in 1994, guess what? The U.S. Air Force released a report, and they concluded that the weather balloon story had been bogus.
Really?
Yes, and according to the 1994 explanation, the wreckage came from a spy device created for an until then classified project called Project Mogul. The device, it was a connected string of high-altitude balloons equipped with microphones, was designed to float furtively over the Soviet Union, detecting sound waves at a stealth distance. And these balloons would ostensibly monitor the Soviet government's attempts at testing their own atomic bomb. And so perhaps the government was testing these out before sending them over the skies of the Soviet Union. The Mogul, Project Mogul, was obviously a very top-secret covert operation, and so a false explanation of the crash was necessary to prevent giving away details of this spy work.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. So we also have eyewitnesses who claim that they saw alien bodies taken from the site and blah, 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 blah. So anyways, what can you tell us in that realm, Gary?
Well, I can only tell you what I know from what they had at the museum and interviews and stuff that have been conducted with people who were around when this happened. Now, supposedly, Mac Brazel, he knew what weather balloons looked like because he had several of them land on his ranch.
Yeah.
And so he was very familiar with what they looked like and how they worked, and he had people come out to remove them before. So this was nothing new. But whatever it was that landed on his property had left a good amount of dirt removed from the ground and left a bit of a ditch. And so when they were called out, the fire department showed up, military from the base and everything, and they were collecting quite a bit of debris at the time. And some of the people who worked with the fire department, and even Jesse Marcel himself, had collected bits and pieces of whatever this craft was.
Yeah, and he took it home. He took some of this wreckage.
He actually
home
took some of it home, and he gave some of it to his son, who
Jesse Marcel Jr.
Yep, Jesse Marcel Jr., who kept it in a little box. And one of the things that Jesse Marcel Jr. said was that one of the pieces was an I-beam, a very small I-beam that had almost hieroglyphic-type writings in it. And he had since made a replica to the best of his recollection of what it looked like. And some of the people who worked for the fire department had claimed to have had pieces of this metal material that couldn't be scratched. It couldn't be torn or crumpled up. It kept its shape very well, and it was just peculiar material. And so when word got out and everything, they went back and they collected all of these bits and pieces of material that were from the crash. And then it was later that they came back and said, oh, no, it was a weather balloon. But when they brought in the stuff, everybody was saying, no, this isn't what we dealt with. They did a photo shoot with this material that they brought in, and you can see the look on the face of Jesse Marcel that he's clearly not believing that this is what he's having to tell everybody was what crashed out there on the sheep farm or the sheep ranch. And for years after that, he said that he didn't believe that's what it was. So now the other component to this, you mentioned that bodies were recovered. And here's the other weird thing about that. So weather balloon. Okay, fine. If they want to say it's a weather balloon. What was up with the bodies? Now, the mortician, who was still alive when we moved out there, we had gone, for my 5th grade class field trip, we had gone to the museum. And because it's local history. And so we took the tour around the UFO museum and everything. And at the end, we were going through the gift shop. And the mortician was there who delivered the coffins to the Air Force Base. And he was still around. And so he had said that, yes, he delivered 3 child-sized coffins to the Air Force Base that night when everything happened. That's peculiar. So that they later explained that as saying, well, it's because we had test dummies that were attached to the weather balloons. They were all part of the test.
Why would you put test dummies in coffins from the mortuary?
Okay, yeah, that's my question. So, number one, you're on an Air Force base. They have crates. They have all sorts of stuff. If they need to ship things, they could easily do that. Why would you need to get 3 coffins? Coffins are used to preserve bodies, not ship dummies. If you want to ship a dummy, there's ways to ship a dummy. If you want to preserve a body, there's ways to preserve a body. So it just doesn't make sense. And smaller coffins, too. The dummies that they have in the museum, if you go there, are life-size dummies, adult-size dummies. Again, why would you go out to get coffins to put dummies in when you could just get crates and you could shove them in there? It just doesn't make sense. Not only that, but the area where the supposed material was kept in one of the hangars was closed off. Nobody could get to it or anything like that. It was heavily guarded. I guess if it were spy material, sure, you probably would want to make sure that that was heavily guarded. But even to this day, I mean, when I was a kid, I remember that hangar had been pointed out hundreds of times by a lot of different people. And it was just something that nobody really went around or, spent any time around. And maybe that's in my head, remembering back and, thinking, maybe there's still something in there. Of course, there's probably not. But Roswell was always filled with unusual things like that. I mean, for crying out loud, the Lisa Marie, Elvis's airplane, was out there on the tarmac.
Yes.
Probably nobody other than anybody who lives in Roswell would know that. I don't know if it's still out there to this day, but when we lived there, it was there, and it had been bought by some prince and had gold toilets and bathroom fixtures and yada, yada, yada. But it's an unusual place.
Yeah, and you bring up an interesting fact there, Gary, because as you know, I was an adjunct instructor at Eastern New Mexico University, Roswell, which was out there on the old Army Air Force Base.
Yes, it was.
So every evening when I'd go to or from a class, I would pass by this hangar, and sometimes the doors were open, people were working inside. And back at that time, their big business out of this hangar that supposedly held the alien bodies in small caskets, they were doing these gold fittings for rich people's private planes.
Isn't that weird?
Yeah. Gold faucets and gold,
whatever they want to put in there.
Right. So talk about unusual. I mean, that was unusual too.
Yeah. But the most unique thing about Roswell, I mean, they really embraced the whole UFO and alien theme greatly.
They've made it a big attraction.
It was always big when we lived out there. It's since grown even larger. But I remember every year we would have the UFO Fest around July, and hundreds of thousands of people would come out to tell their stories of alien abduction or UFO encounters. And you have people who, walk the streets and claim that they're Elvis returned from outer space. I mean, it's unbelievable, but it's a lot of fun. And it definitely is what generates a lot of profit for the city. It's an interesting place to live.
Yeah, and when we were out there, we did drive by the actual crash site where supposedly the UFO crashed in 1947. Yeah. And there was nothing marking the site. It was just this empty field.
Well, no, I think there is one sign that's out there, like a tiny little sign.
It's probably a lot bigger today.
Oh, it could be. I mean, it's unique, and it's funny. I remember we lived there for 4 years. And we were out there right when they started the CW, which was back then the WB, was starting up the Roswell TV show. Mm-hmm. And we were all excited because everybody was like, oh my gosh, they're going to be filming a TV show out here. Oh, we could get on it. We could be famous. You're like 13, 14 years old and think, oh yeah, I could be in this show. I could be famous. And then we waited. There was no trucks or anything. There was no big filming crews, nothing. And then the show comes out, and they depicted Roswell as this tiny little podunk town in the middle of nowhere with, a little diner and all that kind of stuff and nothing else. And I was thinking to myself, and I know me and my friends had a lot of discussion like, this is not anything close to Roswell, New Mexico at all.
Right.
They missed the mark. I don't know what this place was, but it's definitely not where I live.
Yeah.
But aside from the aliens, Roswell is known for, Robert Goddard, who developed the first rockets that soon became the model of what would become the Apollo missions and space travel in general. Right. Was a big part of Roswell. In fact, one of the high schools is named after him. So there's a lot that deals with space and spacecrafts that revolve around that particular place.
And not too far away is White Sands Missile Range, and so it's not surprising to me. In fact, I used to tell you back then when you were, young and wondering about UFOs and what have you, I said, more often than not, this stuff can be explained as some kind of experimental thing that the government is doing, because I can guarantee you a whole lot of stuff must have come down to the ground that had been shot up by White Sands Missile Range.
Well, I can tell you this. I remember back when I was a kid, and the stealth fighter was just coming out.
Yeah.
The stealth fighter was a very top secret, jet.
That was in Alamogordo.
That was in Alamogordo, and it had been tested in other Air Force bases. But the shape was a black triangle. And when you see it fly, it's a black flying triangle. It does not resemble a jet at all, but it is a U.S. military jet. And the first times it was sighted, people thought it was a UFO. So it's not hard to imagine that there could have been experimental aircraft. There could have been all sorts of different things that have been tested. And that would be, I think, more logical. But during the 40s, there was a whole rash of these kind of things popping up all over the country. In fact, we were talking about this before we started recording, and I was telling you about another incident that happened in the 40s. It was called Battle of Los Angeles, where there was some kind of craft that was spotted over Los Angeles. This was during World War II. And the belief was that it was Japanese
air raid
or something, but there was this large object, and so searchlights went out. They unloaded a massive amount of artillery on this thing, and nothing hit it, and it disappeared, and there was no evidence of what it was, and they called it Battle of Los Angeles. Just a very peculiar event. Now, they said that it was possibly one of the balloons that's used to tangle up jets. They used to, kind of look like blimps that would have cables coming down from it, and if a jet got tangled up in it, or not a jet, if a plane got tangled up in it, would cause it to crash. So, a lot of people say, possibly could have been that, but I mean, again, if you shot something like that down, you would have found it. But there were all sorts of different things throughout the 40s that popped up in the skies over America and throughout the world. But I think it's been put very well by a lot of people, a lot of scientists and some people in government positions that say it's foolish to think that we are the only beings in the entire universe that are intelligent or have the capability of space travel. It would be foolish for us to imagine that. I think part of it, though, is it's kind of fun to imagine what if. Even if we are the only beings out there in the universe, sometimes it's kind of fun to imagine what if there was someone else out there. Would they be friendly?
Let the imagination run wild.
Yeah, that's the great thing about imagination.
Well, spoiler alert, I will tell you now what I told you when you were a child there in Roswell, the alien capital of the world.
You're an alien?
And well, some people might think so. But
okay.
If you see something strange and unexplainable that looks like it might have fallen from the skies, think about the possibility that you're looking at some top secret governmental research item, maybe connected with the military, because more often than not, especially there in New Mexico, that's what you're going to find.
Oh, yeah. I would say more than likely that's probably what it is. But again, it's just fun to imagine what if. Well, I think that's going to wrap us up for this episode. And once again...
I'm a human, and my name is Richard.
And I'm Gary, and
what
yes,
what
I'm
if?
a human. But what if I were actually an alien? Woo! All right, if you liked what you heard, make sure you like and subscribe to our show. New episodes are always up on Friday, and we look forward to having you join us again for more incredible stories.